This game is awesome.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated
No, really. We're done.
audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great...
You're still here. Fine, I'll throw my 2 cents into the ring. Terraforming Mars is a fantastic game. Water is also wet, and the sky is blue.
Actually, it's an observation that the sky is blue. It's not blue just because. There's a reason. And scientists figured it out. Light passes through Earth's atmosphere and is scattered. Blue wavelengths more than others because it travels as shorter, smaller waves. The opposite occurs with the ocean, where preferential absorption of long wavelengths gives water a similar hue. Same principle, same results, different process. I'll admit a soft spot for games focusing on hard science. Not so much those that teach remedial science, but rather the ones centering on larger principles, those that channel the pie-in-the-sky optimism of the writers I loved as a child. Arthur C. Clarke, Isaac Asimov, Ray Bradbury, David Bowie. One of my favorite novels growing up was the original Rendezvous with Rama, a story about the expedition to an alien ship where nothing bad really happens. And it's incredible. I wish there were more games focusing on this subject. Kepler 3042 touches on this briefly, but all too often sci-fi games are required to involve shooting something. I await the gateway game focused around string theory. Until then, I still got Terraforming Mars, a game like Kepler 3042 that is strangely competitive, despite a united shared victory held by all, the expansion and development of the human race in their reaching out from their cradle to embrace new worlds. I ranted about that in my review for Kepler 3042, so I won't return to it here. I'd rather just happily splash in this pool of enlightenment. Although, yes, I know, this game is far more speculative than we'd like to think. I must acknowledge that. I consider myself a studied individual, and despite all the science Terraforming Mars claims to boast, it misses one glaring issue. You can't actually terraform Mars. Or rather, no one ever will. The process would not take several dozen generations, but rather between 50 and 100,000 years. There's nothing we can do, knowing our current knowledge of the universe, to increase Mars's gravity beyond 38% of Earth's. Unless we build giant artificial magnetic fields, cosmic radiation will cook anyone taking a stroll without a suit. Combine both of those issues and Mars wouldn't be able to hold onto any atmosphere that we would pile onto it. And there's this little issue about recycling CO2. Mars is also dangerously close to the asteroid belt, and there's no moon of significant size to stabilize its access. Technically, Venus is an easier planet to convert, but even that has its own share of nightmares. In the time required to fully turn Mars into an Earth-like world capable of supporting life as our planet does, we would also possess the knowledge and the technology to colonize a planet already naturally created to accommodate us among the many stars nearby. And we've already found them. No, Terraforming Mars, despite its many claims, offers ideas that may work in a game or on a movie screen, but not even Val Kilmer and a killer robot can realize this dream. Ignoring that criticism, Terraforming Mars is a favorite of mine, despite shocking missteps in production quality in comparison to other games of similar popularity. Seriously, you open the box and everything is just sitting there. No inserts, nothing. The art on the cards are inconsistent, ranging from concept art, manipulated photos, and digital art. There are hundreds of these, so I'll forgive that issue, knowing full well how long it would take one artist to make up all these. Despite that, Terraforming Mars is surprisingly not cheap. I mean, it's a stack of cards and cubes and a game board. The game is twice the price of Century Spice Road. It's only a few dollars cheaper than Scythe, which itself possesses miniatures and much better graphic design. One must then assume these shiny cubes are really expensive to make. Scythe is a fairly interesting comparison to bring up, as the two games share several common features. Terraforming Mars is technically a tableau builder, with Scythe being an engine builder, but both share similar foundations, including a set goal for the entire group that determines the end game. With Scythe, it's when a player scores a 6th victory star. With Terraforming Mars, it's when the planet's 3 requirements for terraforming are satisfied. The global temperature reaches 8 degrees centigrade. That's 46.4 degrees Fahrenheit for the 4% of you still using that archaic scale. Actually, on a side, I will credit the game for not producing a Fahrenheit version for the US market, effectively forcing those that own this game to realize that if they want to become scientists, the metric system is effectively mandatory. Though I had to check to make sure there wasn't a variant out there for those doggedly refusing to adapt. So, hats off, Stronghold. The other 2 goals are an oxygen percentage of 14% and all 9 water tiles placed on the planet. Players assume the roles of corporations tasked with terraforming a planet and profiting off the venture. Although receiving money for achieving goals, points are judged by one's terraforming rating, effectively claiming that the corporation the most responsible for succeeding in the terraforming of Mars will be the winner of the game. And I guess they win Mars? There's certainly an economic element to the game, pointing to a strange detachment from the scientific angle and embracing fundamentally laissez-faire economics, or free market capitalism.
Honey, it's laissez-faire.
Thank you. In terraforming Mars, gigantic as they must be, corporations commanding trillions of dollars can lay down cities, erect orbital facilities, and crash comets, the latter even upon competitors. This potential for corporate conflict involving the doomsday-like result of bringing down the sky to rain upon a new world does not speak of a utopian future where a peaceful people collaborate to forge a new home. This is practically cyberpunk, and I hate to see what Earth would look like in this new world. And yet, Terraforming Mars presents this rivalry and consequence as nonchalant, even indifferent. Crash a comet upon fertile grasslands, setting back the agricultural development for settlers? Oh well, just wait another generation. Each round represents that, an entire generation. So players aren't representing the CEO of a corporation, but rather the unaltering push of a mindless entity over centuries. A machine. If attributing emotions to it, these corporations would be psychotic, lacking empathy, with only their money and power base taking precedent over the well-being of a new world and those trying to start a new life upon it. Yeah, I know. It's a game.
But I will defend this point as praise that a game can spur this type of discussion. Don't suppress. Discuss.
There's a Saltel version of the game where a player assumes the role of a single corporation, one obviously large enough to handle the job entirely on its own, one that commands a power no single entity outside of myth could amass. That's not really that much better. Unless it's all in contract, then I guess maybe. But the moment you add players, a philosophical shift occurs. Corporations take contracts on exclusivity. The moment two compete for an assumed prize, it can be deduced that they answer to no one single power, especially if they possess the authority to act however they wish to achieve the goal of terraforming Mars and emerging the greater power because of it. No matter the situation, Mars has become a battleground, and despite the fact the game places the terraforming of Mars as the ultimate goal, competitors could set the timeline back centuries in their fight for supremacy. Case in point, the Solitaire game has a time limit of 14 generations. Although it's assumed corporations teaming up in the name of peace would cut that time considerably, in certain games with more players this time may extend, as competitors strive to end the game with more power. Terraforming Mars is not the win state, it's the end state. A corporation's rating the level of their power is what determines who wins. The game speaks of a world government, though one willing to let corporations clearly more powerful than the ones in our modern time wield free will in the drive of a singular goal, turning a blind eye to crimes committed to get there. To the winner comes absolution. Is Terraforming Mars a tribute to space exploration? A love letter to the idealistic writings of classic literature? Exalting a possible future where the riches of mankind are used in the development of science and technology, rather than for war, bigotry, and nationalism? Or is it a cautionary tale of how our future can be despoiled by corporate greed and blind ambition, where every facet of society, even our need to explore and understand, is subsidized and funded, ultimately only, to serve the needs of an emotional corporate entity that cares nothing for the betterment of humanity? Still, cool shiny cubes, right? Maybe I should just talk about how to play a board game. Each player either begins with a beginner corporation or a standard one. Only employ the beginner for the first game. The standard ones are far more interesting, though they do encourage a specific strategy going into the game. Each card offers its own set of features. There will be starting revenue in mega credits, potential project cards, and a unique ability. Players also gain the player board listing values in specific fields: credits, steel, titanium, plants, energy, and heat. By default, these are all set at 1. Players also select the color of cubes to represent their claims and the status of each resource on the various boards. Colored cubes are representative of levels and claims. Plated cubes represent the actual resources. If your still rating sits at 4, the cube of your player's color sits at 4. At the beginning of a generation, you gain 4 copper cubes, representing the actual resources. Silver represents 5, and gold 10. As you gain more, you can swap these out to make things easier. Resources not spent are carried over between generations, except for one: energy, which moves to heat at the end of a generation. To the map board, place the 9 ocean tiles in their pending location. White cubes are placed, setting the temperature, oxygen markers at their start, and generation progress on 1 on this terraforming rating. Players place a cube of their color at 20 on this slider. Whoever is highest by the end of the game wins. Shuffle the project deck, removing the corporate era cards unless employing that variant. Deal each player 10 cards. While beginners get to keep all 10 cards, standard corporations must spend starting credits to keep them, 3 per card. 1 player gains the first player marker. As said earlier, a round equates an entire generation. What is a generation? That's somewhat vague. Turns out the answer is as well, with the range falling between 18 and 30 years. Even taking the higher value into account? No, that's not even close to being representative of reality. I'd wager each round would equal a century, at least. But moving on. With the exception of the first generation, you know what? I'm just going to call it rounds. I'll just use rounds. With the exception of the first round, players draw 4 additional project cards, electing to spend 3 credits to keep any. Afterward, play proceeds in turns, starting with the first player. On each turn, players may take up to 2 actions. They can play a card from their hand, spending the mega credits to do so. Red cards are events. After they are resolved, the card is turned over. Greens are automated. They carry a one-time or persistent effect, along with potential victory points for the endgame. They also feature tags. These can either make their deployment cheaper, or they can be combined with other effects to increase endgame victory points or improve other cards. Buildings can be bought with steel, space cards can be bought with titanium, the others generally show up to facilitate other cards. Blue cards are active. They may possess an initial or ongoing effect, but most often they require an action to activate. Most of the time, you're playing these cards to make your corporation's various abilities stronger, enabling larger projects further in the game. Your terraforming rating equals the mega credits you receive at the end of a round, along with your own mega credit rating to help pay for projects in the next round, so improving this is a win-win. Since steel and titanium are worth more than mega credits, increasing these values are also useful. Plants and heat can both be spent to further the overall objective. Spending 8 plants will allow the placement of a green tile, which also increases oxygen. Spending 8 heat increases the temperature of the planet by 1 degree. Each time these happen, your terraforming rating increases, which will also increase your mega credits at the end of a round. This is a brilliant machine. The player cards themselves, not so much. It's depressing that this has contributed to the cottage industry of third-party enhancements, and there are some impressive ones for this game, none of which I will show or review, as I am just sticking with the base box and what's inside. That being said, outside of playing cards, a player can also spend an action to use a standard project. That includes selling cards in your hand, deploying a power plant, which increases your energy output, bringing down an asteroid, increasing the temperature by 1 step. Like I said, nonchalant. Building an aquifer, which employs an ocean tile. Deploying a green tile if you don't have enough plants. And finally, you can set down a city. Cities increase your revenue, but their placement around green tiles will greatly increase a player's points at the end of a game. Being a competitive game, what would it be without rewards? And a player can also spend an action to claim a milestone, assuming that player has met the requirements, or fund an award, which anyone can grab by game's end. What is initially confusing and important to stress is that unlike a game like Dead of Winter, which starts with a round where each player gets a turn, Terraforming Mars doesn't necessarily stop with one complete cycle of players. In fact, play will continue to go around and around if players have enough money to spend or blue cards to activate. Only when all players pass does the round end and the first player marker pass clockwise. When all 3 global requirements are met, that round continues until concluding and the game ends. Although one would assume the highest player on the outer edge of the board would be the winner, final points can significantly swing this value. I mentioned the milestones and the awards. There are additional points based on the face-up project cards. Since players claim greenery and city tiles, these also generate points. Like Scythe, the person that initiates the endgame may not necessarily be the winning player. There's no doubt Terraforming Mars is a well-balanced, fun experience. I may ridicule its interpretation of science, but it tries at least, more so than others. Its heart is in the right place. I mean, assuming you ignore the whole that word. Ignoring that, the game still reinforces the belief that if mankind really put the heart to it, they could do something so amazing and astounding and ill-advised as Terraforming Mars. Regardless of my half-hearted scorn, I'd still rather play this than most others in the same genre, and that includes Scythe. Without a doubt, it falls within my top 10 best games. Period.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.
You're still here. It's over. Close the browser. Go. Oh, I get it. You were expecting some type of homebrew version of Terraforming Mars that will go against the free market capitalism formula endorsed and pushed by the game's creators. Well, no. Obviously, they haven't thought of one. They don't want one, so I'm not going to go against that. So no. Okay, if I was to do one.
It's fitting, given my rant about the free market philosophy covertly favored in this game, that Terraforming Mars, even now with 3 expansions, doesn't offer an official cooperative variant. In fact, the latest offering, Prelude, is more about making a better corporation. Seriously. I mean, it's not impossible. In fact, one game I mentioned earlier in comparison is itself a cooperative game. Somewhat. Dead of Winter. Albeit with a traitor mechanic, but let's ignore that for now. With that game, at the start of a round, a crisis card is revealed. Often, players must sacrifice needed resources based on the number of players to the crisis in order to satisfy it, else suffer the consequences at the end of the round. This does require some work. I actually have some blank poker cards here because I'm not at all developing my own game. A crisis is revealed at the beginning of a round, with exception of the first round of the game. There are 2 types of crisis cards, persistent and cataclysmic. Persistent feature a crisis that must be resolved to prevent the fail state at the end of a round. However, if not resolved, by the end of a turn, the card remains face up in play, repeating its effects until finally resolved. This can mean several of those cards can be in play at once. A value of tokens or tiles must be placed on the card dependent on the number of players/corporations in the game. A cataclysm is a single event which is not persistent, but also cannot be avoided. These are really bad events, but at least they don't need to be resolved. Here are some examples of crisis cards. Some require resources, tiles, or even tags, the latter involving sacrificing cards in hand or in play. If in play, a removed card also removes its benefits. Like the solo variant already included in Terraforming Mars, this cooperative game employs the advanced rules located at the end of the book. To make it a tad more interesting, let's throw down a few more rules regarding victory points, no longer employed within this game as such. This value is shared by all as planetary infrastructure. Set this at 20 as well, using a gold cube. This setting is the maximum amount of mega credits that can be earned via any player's terraforming rating, meaning if a player has a rating higher, they still only gain the mega credits from the level where planetary infrastructure is set. This is not related to a player's own ME value, mind you. Yes, this means negative victory points still reduce this value. The only way to increase planetary infrastructure is to play cards with this value. It does not increase with the player's own TR rating, so increasing global values does not affect it. Only cards that would normally award victory points at the end of the game. Now they alter the planetary infrastructure and do so immediately. This includes cards with resources based on the number of tags and so forth. Cities placed to generate victory points based on adjacent green tiles also increase planetary infrastructure. If a crisis card's fail effect cannot be implemented, planetary infrastructure must be reduced instead. I would still separate project cards with abilities featuring a red box. These are ones that would normally be used to steal resources from other players or otherwise hamper their progress. It may be difficult to determine which ones fall into that category, as some may actually be employed cooperatively. I was able to remove about 20 cards this way. Set the difficulty to the required end time. 14 was for a solo game, but with the added crisis cards, reaching this goal, even with additional players, will be extremely difficult. I'd put it at 16 to 18 for a standard game with 2 players, decreasing this goal as more players are added. This is just an example of how such a cooperative experience could be handled. I'd imagine scenario cards where the global values could be adjusted, more variety other than the 20-odd cards suggested here, but this wasn't exactly difficult, so it's a bit of a shock that creators haven't thought of it. Unless they really, really didn't want one.
Okay, you happy? There's your cooperative version of Terraforming Mars. I'm sure the creators will hate it, but there you go. It's done. It's still an amazing game. I still love it. Done. You can roll the credits now. I mean, for real this time. Go. That's your... You can say it anytime.
Oh, God, you're horrible.
Right.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com.